Hello and welcome to the next episode of Coffee and Comebacks. And today we've got Langley Sharp MBE joining us. Langley is the former head of the Centre for Army Leadership. He was responsible for championing leadership excellence across the British Army. Now, having himself graduated from Sandhurst 2 decades ago, his career in the Parachute Regiment, or the Paras, that you might also know it as, which included operational command at every rank, saw him deployed to a number of different operational theatres from Northern Ireland, Macedonia, Afghanistan and Iraq. And I'm sure we're going to go into some of the highs and lows of those experiences, Langley. But amongst his many varied roles, he led a counter-insurgency task force operation. He commanded a Para Regiment Battalion, and he also delivered the MOD's training programme for the London 2012 Olympics venue security, for which he received his MBE. We're going to talk a bit about Langley's book because he's also the author, The British Army's Official Account of Leadership, The Habit of Excellence. And I'm really keen for us to explore leadership as well. So this is distilling over 3 centuries of the Army's experience in the art, science and practice of leadership. And now Langley is the founder and director of the consultancy firm Frontier Leadership. Langley is now dedicated to sharing his experiences to help individuals, teams and organisations perform at their best. So he's a passionate believer in the power of leadership as a force multiplier for social good. And we're really going to spend a lot of this conversation going into that. But before we do, Langley, and I feel like I've, stolen a lot of your thunder with that introduction as it is, could you just give us a bit more of a sense on our listeners of who you are? And welcome.
Well, Sam, it's great to be here and great to be chatting to you. Obviously, I've known you and admired your work as well over many years, and it's a privilege to be here with you today. So thank you very much for that kind introduction. So I, as you've mentioned, I served 23 years in the British Army as an officer in the Parachute Regiment. Joined shortly after university, and left May of this year for Ventures New. I often say that I could probably count on 2 hands the number of days that I got out of bed and didn't want to go to work. So I feel really privileged to have had such a long career, I guess, in an organisation that I absolutely love, surrounded by some amazing people. I got out to settle the family and try something new, but I certainly left on a high, which again was a real privilege. But yeah, from a very stable, loving background, mum, dad, brother, and I always say that I had a privileged upbringing, not in terms of wealth or money, but certainly in terms of love, support, challenge, and the opportunities that my parents, my family gave me. I think sort of made me the person I am, that enabled me to enjoy a career in the army and whatever comes next. So we will see. ...
Yeah, it's exciting times, isn't it? What made you join the army? How did you reach that decision when you were such a young age?
I was talked into it, I think. So I was never one of these people that was always dead set on joining the army. I always enjoyed the outdoors. I was always very sporty at school, so always very active. And I went to university, and I kind of had an inkling that that may be a career that would interest me. I say a career, I never signed up to, even when I joined, signed up to do the time I did. But I did a bit of officer training corps at university, and even after the first year there, I thought I was going to quit because I wasn't really enjoying it. Certainly not getting cold and wet and running around in puddles.
And then you joined the Paras.
And then I joined the Paras. I don't know what went wrong there, but I always blame a good friend of mine, Marcus Beckett, who was a reservist in the Parachute Regiment, who's now has for a long time now lived in Australia. But he kind of taught me into. I actually tried the Territorial Army first, and I went for a commission shortly after I left the OTC. I left university. I was still in Sheffield for a year. And I thought I'll give the Territorial Army, as it was then, a go. And I failed my application, my tests down at Westbury. They said, no, you're not the sort of person we want to join the army. I said, okay, then I'll have to think of something else. And then Marcus said, they made a mistake. Well, go for the regular commission, see how you get on. I was like, well, if they don't want me in the reserves, they're not going to want me doing this thing full time. But anyway, I went along, gave it a go, and passed.
How wrong they were.
It worked out good. Well, interestingly enough, my syndicate DS directing staff on the TA course was a para, and he's the one that failed me. I saw him a few years later when I was a captain, and I said, "Ah, do you remember me?" But yeah, and as I say, Marcus was a Parachute Regiment guy, and he said, "Well, why don't you go for a look at life of the Paras?" I said, I barely know if I want to join the army, let alone join an organisation, a unit as with the reputation they had. He said, "Well, I've booked you in for 2 days, look at life, so you're off anyway." So, and I did. I went a couple of days with them and loved it. And they fortunately sponsored me through Sandhurst, and I managed to earn a place when I was there, and the rest is history. Yeah,
and have an amazing career, which we'll go into in a bit more detail. And I don't know actually if you're watching the BBC series on at the moment, the SAS Rogue Heroes, where it starts off with the whole story around World War II and the parachutes, but not everyone will have a good understanding. Have you not seen that yet?
I haven't seen it yet. No, I started watching the other night, but we got distracted. But I've read the book. Yeah,
okay. Yeah, I've read the book too. It's a good one. But so for some people, they will have a good understanding whether they've watched that or anything else. But not everybody listening will have, more of an insight in terms of the Parachute Regiment, what they do. Could you just give us a potted history, a brief history in terms of exactly what it means to be part of the Paras? Because I think, it's really important to demonstrate the level of pressure, at any level, but particularly when you're operating in that sort of unit. So for those listening,
for sure. So it's probably one of the Army's younger regiments, formed at the beginning of World War II when Mr. Churchill declared that he needed some airborne troops, 5,000 airborne troops in 1940 when he declared it, and they were in action within a couple of years in Europe, North Africa, and some sort of very significant battles in Normandy and Arnhem. So they set their stall out early on, and as a sort of highly professional selected force as it was then. And at that point, in our early history, people from all different walks of life and all different regiments joined to serve in the Parachute Regiment, and it later became a direct entry thereafter. But I guess we've always maintained those very high professional standards. We've always been very fortunate in that we've had a selection process. Additional selection process to get in through P Company, the physical test to get in, which tests people both mentally and physically. So we're always very fortunate that we've had that barrier that's people that have to overcome, and therefore we managed to select some good people. And another reason we're quite fortunate is even today, from the very beginning, when recruits join the Army and they say, "I want to join the Parachute Regiment," they train together as paras. So we're able to instill that ethos and that culture and that sense of shared identity from the very beginning. And I saw that as a platoon commander training recruits for a couple of years, almost 20 years ago now. But that's a really important start to instill in that sense of what what we're joining, what we're part of, and we've managed to maintain those high standards, and that I would say illustrious history since then. And 2 roles now, just to finish off in terms of what we do. We have a global response capability, so we're able to project at speed and via the air, of course, anywhere in the world. So we have troops at very high notice to move in 2 and 3 para, and then 1 para is now part of the Special Forces Support Group, so has a role supporting the SS and SBS and others on the Special Forces operations. So it would a dual-rolled capability now. 1 paratrooper, 2 roles.
Exactly. And we've obviously known each other for a long time because we're your wife, Heather, because the one thing we haven't mentioned is that you are also a father and a husband, and that's something you've been juggling through that time. And Heather and I were at Sandhurst together, and that's when obviously you met Heather, and you and I have known each other since then. So you've also, during your time of obviously serving and then now transitioning and building a new career, you're also juggling that with parenthood and all the fun that comes with that.
Absolutely, yeah, the trials and tribulations of marriage life and parenthood. And yeah, I was going to come on to Heather and the kids. I mean, as many people who are married with children, the center of my world, certainly And of course that creates, as you mature and get older, those dynamics add a different perspective to work and life, of course, and different priorities, which is a discussion in itself. But I'm very fortunate in having Heather, who's at my absolute rock, and I certainly couldn't have done what I've done and the career I've had. And everything you kindly read out, much of that was enabled by Heather being there by my side, and perhaps we can go into that later on. But yeah, a remarkable woman in her own right, as you know well, and fortunate to have two great kids who keep us on our toes regularly.
Yeah, no, they're gorgeous. And in terms of Heather, I am trying to convince her to also come onto the podcast. So maybe you can, because actually with the work that Heather did previously in terms of serving, but also now with the Forces Wise Challenge and promoting, that would be amazing. So watch this space.
Far more credible than I, but yeah, get Heather on. She's got a great story to tell. Remarkable.
Absolutely. So going back to you though, in terms of major life events, we sort of had the discussion, didn't we? You've been fortunate not to have some major challenges that have necessarily knocked you back, apart from maybe the people at the TA centre that almost destroyed your career that never was. But we talked about focusing on just the many different challenges that come with command and leadership, and obviously that's an area of your expertise, not just through your experience but also through your research and your work, and obviously really directly relative to the work that you do now with different businesses, organizations and individuals. So is that where we're going to focus this element, and how would you introduce our listeners into what you want to talk about around the pressures of command?
Yeah, sure. So I was thinking about this beforehand. As you say, we had a chat the other day, and I guess there's some people out there that have faced some really significant challenges in life and can pinpoint that was a life-changing moment for me, and these are lessons I learned, and these the sort of consequences and my journey since. I guess for me, fortunately, unfortunately, whatever it may be, I've of course, like everyone, had many ups and downs and challenges along the way, but nothing that significantly stands out. But one thing that, as I look back on my 23 years of career, where did I feel it most? Where was I challenged most? And I guess that is, as you've already alluded to, the pressure of command. And in the military, we differentiate between command, leadership, and management. Command being the authority that's invested in an individual in their rank or their position. Management is more about sort of process and managing resources, and leadership is that ability to influence others in order to achieve an outcome, so that social relationship. But of course, command, and we have a clear command structure in the army, comes with it, as I say, responsibility and accountability, and therefore pressure, inevitable pressure. And looking back, I think the times where I've been most challenged professionally has certainly been in those times where I am the single point of focus, if you like, of that particular group that I've been in charge with, in command in. And I look back at three particular points, and interestingly, although they're the most challenging, these points are probably the highlights of my career as well. So the privilege of command that comes with that. The first one being as a young platoon commander. I've told this story before. Actually, I was speaking to someone the other day. As you know yourself, Sam, with your background, you do a year at Sandhurst, and you've got no one to look after apart from yourself, and helping your friends around you, but you're not in charge of anyone. There's no pressure in that sense. You're there to learn, to develop, and then all of a sudden, 18 months later, when you've done your subsequent qualifying courses, you're there in front of your platoon or your troop for the first time. And for me, that was 5 Platoon B Company 2 Para in Northern Ireland, and they were 2/3 of the way into a 6-month tour, 2 months to go, and I walk into this room of 30 rather grotty looking paratroopers. Some of them had just got out of bed, some of them just come off patrol, and they were living for 6 months in a room no bigger than half a football pitch, if that, with in fact probably a quarter of a football pitch in triple high bunk beds, and I had these 30 people just staring at me, with a weight of judgment in their eyes, thinking, who's this young upstart, and what's he going to be like as our next boss? Here we go again. And it was at that moment I realized, this is it. I'm in command. I'm in charge of these people, and you know, the decisions I make, you know, can literally affect their lives in certain circumstances. And it's a significant way to respond to them. And it just dawned on me, and all the fun of, you know, training and all that that we're set up to. That moment we're actually set up for. There's the dawning realization. It's not till you're actually in the seat you think, wow, this is it. And because we were on operations at the time, you know, I certainly felt the pressure there. The next time I felt it, you know, acutely, was certainly, as you mentioned at the beginning, my time as a task force commander in Afghanistan. I had 120 British soldiers under my command. We were mentoring a task force, an Afghan force of about 500, conducting joint operations with them for a 6-7 month period. And I was the task force commander. Now, of course, I had a headquarters above me that provided that umbrella and that support. But day to day, it was my decisions. You know, where we did the operations, the risk of those operations, the development of the force. Everything was kind of on my shoulders to a degree, and shared, of course, by the superb team I had around me. But yeah, there was definitely an acute pressure, particularly when lives were genuinely on the line as they're stepping out the door, which was something to deal with. And then the third time that probably the most pressure I've ever felt was as a commanding officer. So this is a few years later now, and I had about 750 people under my command, various different cap badges, mostly Parachute Regiment. And of course, I felt that there was two elements of pressure that I felt. And one I think I was expecting, and the other I wasn't. But I think I always say the pressure of command, you can't really prepare for that. I could prepare for myself for the role of the job itself. I knew the system, I knew the unit, I knew a lot of the people, I knew the processes. And even if I didn't, I had a lot of experts around me, and you lean on the people around you. But the pressure was something I hadn't quite prepared for. And there was two elements of pressure. One is the responsibility of the output of the unit. You know, we were an operational unit. We had people deployed on operations 24/7, 365, making sure that they were trained to the required standard. They were delivering operations. We were force developing, and everything that comes with that. You know, you're effectively a de facto CEO of that unit. But there's also the pressure of self-induced pressure to, you know, to deliver to the standard that you and your peers around you in the headquarters expected of you. And I was in a high performance unit surrounded by, and we were supporting other units who were, you know, exceptional in every sense. And you know, for me, the pressure to keep up and keep driving forward, and not just delivering to the standard expected, but going beyond that, and looking to the future and looking at new operations and everything that came with that, really was significant amount of pressure. And so yeah, I think for me, those are the real challenges that I felt throughout my career. And I've talked about this sometimes out of work and with leaders from other sectors. And I think this is something that definitely resonates. My context may well have been different, of course. But you know, there's people that have these responsibilities across every sector at different levels of leadership and management that people are feeling, particularly in today's world with the challenges we all face.
Yeah, I would agree. And when it comes to the fundamentals of leadership, I always say exactly that. Fundamentals of leadership don't change, just the context. And I think you say something very similar, and we've had these conversations before. So they can all be directly applied to different situations. And there's two key things I wanted to draw out of what you said there. So thank you for going into that. And there's, you know, I'd love to just go into some of those stories, as I know the power of some of them, but equally I'm conscious of time. But the first one's around self-induced pressure, because you know, we're often having conversations, particularly in this, as you say, world of 24/7, where we can be contacted if we allow ourselves to be. And I think that's the important point. We can be contacted 24/7. And how do we deal with the fact that we've sometimes got eyes on us all the time, or feel like we have eyes on us, whether physically or metaphorically? So how would you say that you either dealt with the self-induced pressure, but and or also support others now in looking at that pressure in terms of how they not just put pressure on themselves, but sometimes allow that inner critic to take over, which, as we know, can be really quite crippling. What's your thoughts on that?
So how did I deal with the pressure? I think there's different ways of doing it. Firstly, it's using the people around you. I've already mentioned Heather, and she was an obvious one, but she wasn't there when I was a platoon commander, but she was when I was in Afghanistan for that particular period I was talking about, and as a commanding officer. And both times she said to me, right, this is I've got home life, I've got it, it's all covered. This is your time. You go and do what you have to do. We're here when you need us, but we appreciate this is your time. I was really, really fortunate to have that. I had other tours when we were just going out before we were married, and we hadn't sort of established those boundaries. And I'd phone up and she'd be stressed at home and I'd be stressed, on operations. Or in fact, a time when she was in Afghanistan herself in 2006, and there's difficult conversations over the phone. Whereas in 2013, she would, when I'd phone up once a week, we would limit ourselves one phone call a week, and when I phoned up, she was always smiling and everything was all okay. Even if it wasn't, it was all okay, because she knew that she didn't know what I was going to be doing if I was going out on the ground the next day or that day. The last thing I needed is for me to be worrying about whatever's going on at home. So, and we managed to stabilize. She went to live with her mum for those 6 months, which was fantastic, and huge credit to mother-in-law and father-in-law supporting that. So the family life was stable, and the same for when I was a commanding officer. Heather said, "We got this," because a lot of the pressure I see for people that are, a lot of my soldiers, it's quite easy when you're on operations because you're focused on one thing, and all you've got to do is get out of bed and do one thing every day, and you're all doing the same thing. So you don't have to worry about normal day-to-day life. It's when you come back to barracks life, that's when life gets really difficult, because you've got to worry about relationships and children and schooling and cars and,
life,
tiles falling off the roof. Life, right? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And that's what we all feel nowadays. We all struggle with trying to get that balance. So having those conversations with partners and family members, whoever your nearest and dearest are, and establishing those boundaries, I think is really important, that knowing you're there for one another. Equally, it's understanding who you can go to, the people I call them trusted agents, who you can go to and close the door and have some really heartfelt, honest conversations. And as a commanding officer, and I use the term de facto CEO because at that particular point I was sort of I didn't have any peers within the unit, and therefore, who do I turn to within the unit? And I had I had my second in command, Aaron Wade, one of my best friends, who again could close the door. We could have some really frank conversation, what was working, what wasn't. My regimental sergeant major, my right hand man, so the senior soldier within the unit, I could often say to him, what are the soldiers thinking? What's your perspective, your experience guy? And he would always tell me the truth, even if I didn't like it. The senior late entry officer, so someone that's been all the way through the ranks, got a commission, and is now made 30 years of experience. And the padre, Jonathan Daniel, was fantastic, and he'd often come in. We'd have chats about what's going on in the unit, and he had access to all the soldiers and had some pretty open conversations. As padres do, a very special relationship. And although he can tell me the detail because of the confidentiality, he can give me a sense and smell of what was going on in the unit, and really good insight. But at every conversation, he'd always say to me at the end, "And how are you, Langley?" And I'd always smile. "Yeah, no, all's good here. Yeah, no, but how are you?" And it always have that ear for me, which is really great, because a couple of times it was nice to say, "Okay, yeah, this is what's going on in my head." So having those people, those trusted agents you can go to and have those conversations is important. And I guess the final thing, sorry, lots of
no, it's great. Here, keep going.
I guess the final thing is keeping everything in perspective as well, and having as best you can balance. Now, as you say, in certain positions, particularly within the military sense, when you're in command, when you have got that pressure, you can't turn your phone off necessarily. Of course, you have to balance that and manage that effectively. But I think it's about having outlets and having dedicated time for, whether it be for family, being really strict about your priorities, that, only contact me when, critical things happen, but otherwise this is my time or my family's time. And for me, as I know yourself, Sam, so it's similar outlet, it's exercise. So, getting out there, going down the gym, working on the bag, going for a run, whatever it may be, just to be able to get that release. And Heather is the same, and we're just different people as a result. You can come back in stronger. So I think having that healthy balance, healthy mind, healthy body, as I say, is really, really important. Otherwise, everything can just become too all consuming.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other point I was going to draw out, which actually you've done naturally, is about that team, is in terms of how do you build that team around you. So you've sort of gone into that in terms of that can really make the difference. But the point you made about Heather being so understanding and empathetic, do you think that's because Heather had also served and been on operations and understood the pressure? Because as you rightly said, and for some people listening, and I'm sure we've all been there at times, and you even said that at a point you and Heather were there, that if you are working really hard, and there's lots, as you say, there is swings and roundabouts when it comes to most roles. There'll be some really high pressure times, and other times it might be a little bit more relaxed, and you're able to swing the pendulum the other way and spend more time with the family at home. But tension can come in the relationships when there's not necessarily an understanding of when those pressure points are, or what can be. Do you have any thoughts on that in terms of how that can help others, but also how maybe Heather's experience maybe contributed to the fact that you could establish those boundaries?
Yes, she does, in terms of she understands the army and she understands the system. But sometimes you can understand that too much, I guess, as well. So it can work in both ways. Interestingly, on Heather's story, I know you'll come on to hopefully get Heather on the program. But it was really interesting. She always kept me in check about the importance of families, and the army and the military more broadly does do a lot for the families. But there will always be there will always be a debate about whether they do enough. And Heather's story, having served for 10 years, and being, as she says, on one side of the fence, as a serving personnel with a family, and then coming out and realizing how difficult it is being, in her case, a military wife on the other side, having lost her identity or changing her identity. And then she realized this amazing, talented, diverse community in terms of the military wives and partners that the support to those of us that are serving, and hence why she set up the Forces Wide Challenge and does what she does today. So certainly her experience, I think broadly, it does help. Just remind me the second part of your question there, Sam.
So it's more about, for those that haven't served or aren't serving, it might be any sort of situation, how do they actually establish boundaries with their nearest and dearest if they haven't got that direct knowledge and experience?
So I think it's just about having some really honest conversations about what the job involves and what you are willing to commit, whether you as the individual that's involved in the job, or the family, and what you're, exactly as you said, just have honest conversations about what those boundaries are. Because where I got it wrong was after command. So as I say, during my time as a command officer, 2.5 years, Heather said, "You got this. This is your time. We're here." She said, "I've got the family." I then moved to the Centre for Army Leadership for 2 years, and I had a great team around me. It was a fascinating subject, and we had loads of work we wanted to get after. Then COVID kicked in, and we actually self-generated even more work, helping the NHS and providing some support to other leaders and leading through crisis and learning from the army and what have you. And then we started writing the book, and then we rewrote the doctrine, then we started doing a podcast, then we did our conferences, and it was all self-generated, but we were so enthusiastic by it and had such a great team. And we just kept saying yes to too many things, and it reached a point, I think, as we were halfway through writing the book, and Heather said, "What are you doing? You're not seeing the family. You're still working till 10 o'clock at night." And that wasn't the deal. You had your time as command officer, and of course I understand you work hard and you love it, but there's got to be some balance here. And I'm just trying to think whether I managed to rebalance effectively. But I certainly having those honest conversations and some checkpoints to say, listen, this isn't working, and coming back to it. This was the agreement. I think is really, really important. I think for people that don't have those conversations, they're going to struggle. You've hit the nail on the head. It's setting the boundaries, and then just keep reminding yourselves of both sides of the relationship. Are you meeting your part of the deal here? Because if you ignore those tensions, they'll just eat away, and it will emerge too late, and that's really damaging. So, yeah, it's good to talk.
100%. No, and that is great advice as well. And I think that can be home relationships, work relationships. It can be relationships with the children. Mine are just about to go back after half term, and obviously we've had to make some or build some boundaries around half term and saying, right, at these times I'm going to be working, but then at these times I'm going to put work down and we're going to spend time together. So that means they leave me when I'm working, but they also go, you did say you were going to take us and do this and XYZ. So it's just establishing boundaries with people around you and yourself, and I think make sure that you stay grounded and balanced, doesn't it?
Definitely, I totally agree. I mean, I'm in a slightly different position now. Maybe we'll come into this. Setting up a business and more than I, Sam. But setting up a business, a lot of effort you want to put into that. Heather's trying to expand her work as well, and at the same time, as you say, kids, half term, daily life, right? And I often say, keep reminding Heather. I said we need to, kids need routine. That's how they thrive. They need routine. But we actually forget that about ourselves sometimes. We constantly, let's just check my emails again. Let's just check the phone again. Let me just do another half an hour here. Let me just make a phone call. I'll stay up late and do X, Y, and Z rather than getting some proper sleep. And I talk a good game, but we constantly have to remind ourselves that we need routine and boundaries too.
100%. And I feel like we could talk about this all day, but I really want to move on to the coffee break questions and then the next element. But one thing I would say about that is that, balance is different for everybody. And I think it's about, as you've said already throughout the conversation, finding the balance that works for you and establishing the boundaries. And sometimes you do need to go to make that phone call. Sometimes you do need to do that work late into the evening because, you've gone off to watch the kids' rugby match or whatever it might be during the day. But it's more, is that the norm or is it an exception? And I think when it becomes the norm that you're always, burning the candle at both ends, then obviously then it can lead to burnout and lots of other relationship challenges.
Definitely.
So I'm looking forward to this part, and I always do, which is our coffee break. Although you're not going to get a coffee break, you need to stay on. So, but the coffee break.
I'll have a glass of water as I go.
You have a glass of water. See, I'm the same. No caffeine after lunchtime. So what is your all-time favourite film and why?
Really difficult one, this, because I love a good film. I think my go-to answer is The Deer Hunter. Nothing to do with the fact that it's a war film, because it's a slightly on edge one. It's not an action-packed one, so to speak, but it just for the story. I love a film that tells a story and it is acted superbly, and when you can get into the characters and you can believe them. And the Deer Hunter, which was I think won 5 Academy Awards 30-40 years ago, is definitely in that category. There's a couple of others. I mean, there's loads, but Neil by Mouth with Ray Winston and Kathy Burke, probably 20 years old now, but again the grittiness and the honesty and the rawness of that, and the acting. And another one, because I love authentic acting, was On the Waterfront, Marlon Brando, sort of 1950s. He was so far ahead of his time. So there's 3 that stand out. Sorry,
and 3 that I've not seen.
Okay.
So I failed because I clearly not. Although I am rubbish when it comes to movies, because I either fall asleep or forget about them once I've watched them, because maybe I did watch them and just didn't remember. So books then, and there's something I don't tend to forget and actually prefer books. And I know a lot of our listeners will either read books or a lot of us consume. In fact, I listened to your book that we're going to come on to, and I know is about to go live in paperback. But what's the last book you read or listened to, or your favourite book, whichever one you prefer? And it can't be yours, obviously.
So yeah, I definitely wouldn't self-publish. But so this book, and I've got it ready actually because I knew this question was coming, is both the most recent book, because I've reread it and it's my favorite book, and it's Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. 160 pages, so a short read, but quite a I say it's a tough read. It's definitely tough in terms of the subject. The most compelling book I've ever read, and it's written by Viktor Frankl, who is a psychologist in Vienna pre-World War II. He was Jewish. He was taken captive by the Nazis and spent 3 years in captivity in Auschwitz, Dachau, and other concentration camps. And he tells that story, but it's what he got from that is the real message. So Man's Search for Meaning, it's all about freedom and responsibility and purpose in life. And from someone, I often say, from someone who, I don't think there could be many greater authorities on freedom, from a man who lost his in the most horrific of circumstances, and how he mentally clung onto his life and survived through his search for meaning. It's utterly compelling. Yeah, 75 years old, I think the book is, but and still going strong. I urge everyone to read it. I think Simon Sinek on the back here, Simon Sinek says every human being should read this book. I think he's pretty much nailed it.
Wow. Well, I can't promise I'll watch all the 3 films, but I'll definitely be reading that one. What's an interesting fact then that most people won't know about you?
I keep pigs.
Well, I know that.
Well, you know that because you saw them recently. Yeah, we got into keeping pigs about 10 years ago. We only did it for a couple of years, but we used to have them for 6 to 9. Apologies to any vegetarians listening, but 6 to 9 months we give them a wonderful life, and then they'd be off for the freezer. And so we've just got some back now, and it's brilliant to see the kids out looking after them and giving them a good life. So, and that's one of my, people talk about mindfulness. Well, part of that is exercise, and part of that is going out and chilling with the
Feeding
pigs.
the pigs.
My reputation is ruined.
Well, thanks for sharing that. And by the way, I'm sure you're going to get a lot of banter from
Exactly.
any of your para friends that are listening to that. So let's get on to what next then. So in terms of what you've been doing since you left the military, and also you said actually you were writing your book when you were still serving. You were part of you were leading the Centre of Army Leadership. So can you just talk us through the sort of key milestones in your career and your transition and where you are now? So just give our listeners a flavour of frontier leadership and your journey to get there.
Yeah, sure. I mean, we spoke about the career. I guess in terms of the book, actually, that was the brainchild of Professor Lloyd Clark, who's the director of research at the CAL, the Central Army Leadership, and it was his idea to do a book. And he's a published author himself. He's just released his 9th book actually, and he said, we need to write a book for 2 reasons. One, it was to give our serving personnel a richer understanding, contextual understanding of what leadership. We've got our doctrine, we've got our philosophy, but actually bring it to life through our history and through our current understanding of what that means. So that was one of those. And the other, probably arguably more important, was, as we say, it was a platform, a basis for a discussion with people from all different sectors about what we thought leadership meant, and in so doing have a debates and discussion about what it meant to other people, and so we can learn from one another. And that was the whole reason the Centre of Army Leadership was set up circa 6 years ago, was to be able to do the thinking on leadership for the Army, on behalf of the Army. But really it was about, networking with others and learning from others and sharing our story. So that was really what the book was all about. So I always say my name's on the front cover, but the fingerprints are many on the inside. It was a genuine team effort. Lloyd was my mentor throughout and sort of steered it. And it was a lot of work to put into that. Lots of people contributing, but we're really happy with the result. As I say, it's been out a year now. October last year, the hardback came out, and Penguin have now sold out the hardbacks, and their paperbacks coming out on the 3rd, which you reminded me tomorrow, which I'd forgotten. And so. And it's been really well received, which we're really happy with, and it's really nice to get that feedback from different people from different sectors, from different backgrounds, phoning you up or sending you a message and say, listen to the book, and this really resonates. I've got no military background. I'm a sports professional, or I'm a brain surgeon, or I'm a faith leader, and I really liked whatever we're talking about. And it goes absolutely back to your point, Sam, that the fundamentals endure. And for us, that was what it was all about. Our context is different, and this is what it means to us, but the fundamental principles is the same for all of us. And I guess that's what compelled me to start Frontier Leadership, the small leadership consultancy that I've recently set up, because I'm so passionate about the power of leadership. I've seen it work well. I've been part of teams in organization where leadership is at the heart of it. It's high performance because of its people, because of its leaders, because of the cultures they create, because of the followers, and I use that in a positive term. Separate discussion, but we don't understand followership enough, but it's absolutely critical to success. And obviously, I've seen it done badly as well, and the impacts that it has. And I've seen that in business, I've seen that in sport, I've seen that in of course in the military. And so for me, it was a case of, well, I enjoy talking about this, and I'd like to share some of my learning and blending my sort of practical and theoretical experience. For the benefit of others, and hence why Frontier Leadership is set up. So we're a small consultancy. I say we, it's just me at the moment. I'm doing talks and master classes and coaching, what have you. But I have got a few other projects in mind where really for me it's about having maximum impact, because as you mentioned at the beginning, it's a force multiplying effect. Good leadership is, and our society needs it. And when it works, the results speak for themselves. So if we can share those lessons with others, then we'll all be in a better place.
Yeah, 100%. And we've spoken, haven't we, about getting to that point of deciding to go down that route. So
yeah,
would you mind sharing some of your processes in terms of going through the really tough decision to leave the military? Timing's everything, and how's that all going to work? So in terms of the decision making process, but then also what led you to discover that purpose of leading this yourself, in terms of bringing yourself to the fore? Could you talk us through some of that? Because I know people listening, there'll be some that are going through this transition, whether it's military or sport or other elements of their career. Making that decision is often the most difficult element, isn't it? And then knowing what steps to go through to create that path.
Definitely. I think you hit the nail on the head there in terms of the transitions you make in life, or the big decisions you make. The hardest bit is actually getting off your backside and doing it. It's that moment of making that decision. After that, the journey to sort of takes its course, so to speak. My decision, or our decision, because of course it was a family decision to leave the army, was probably 2 years in the making. Probably 20 years. I think most people in the army would say that they're constantly talking about leaving. And of course, inevitably, we all do at some point. And for me, I'd had the fortune of unit command. I had a great job at the Centre for Army Leadership, so I felt I was leaving a high. I'd got over the line for promotion, and I was waiting for promotion. So I could have gone on, but the age of my kids at the time, it would, they were due to, my oldest was due to join boarding to senior school, and so it was either go down the boarding school route because we couldn't keep moving the kids around every year, 2 years. And at that point, my daughter was 10 years old, and she'd been to 9 schools and nurseries, and we just couldn't carry on with that. So it was either settle them in boarding school and me carry on a career, or get out and try something new. And it was a difficult decision because I love the army, and as a family we'd benefited, and so it was difficult, but quite rightly family won in the end. And but equally, it's not as if I wasn't looking forward to the professional challenges ahead. I was really excited about where that may lead as well. And you talk about lots of people going through these conversations and transitions wherever they are in life. I think for me, it's all about the positive mindset, having a positive mindset. I remember having a conversation with my RSM, Den Starkey, as he was about to leave his role and 6 months later, I was about to leave as command officer. And you know, it was pinnacle of both our careers, and we absolutely loved what we did. The privilege of command was right up there. And we discussed that day when you walk out the gates, and you know, unless you walk out those gates with a positive mental framework and mindset, then you're really going to struggle. And for us, we both agreed that you've got to walk forward. You can't look back. You look back and you are grateful for what you've learned and the experiences you've had, and that's part of you, but you take that forward and look, whatever the next challenge, even if you don't really know where you're heading, look forward to the next challenge. And I think you've got to have that mindset in any field, in any walk of life. And so I sort of try to capture that and take that forward, moving out of the army, which is probably the biggest decision I've had to make in sort of 20, 30 years. But I knew that I actually didn't know what job I was going into. I didn't have a clue, didn't know what sector I wanted to work in, large, small, self-employed, work for another company, didn't know. So for 4 months, I talked to lots of people, had lots of conversations, and I thought, right, I want to work in a small startup, and I want to be a big fish in a small pond, something new, creative, diverse team that's going places. And so I worked as a chief operating officer for a guy called John, and John owned a big company until last year. Sold that, was invested in a load of other companies, and I learned a lot from him. I only worked for him a couple of months, and then it didn't work out. He had a change of plan in terms of some of his direction, and so I moved on. But I had a great time with John. And so 2 months later, after having worked out, right, this is the path I'm going to go down, I'm all set, really excited, got the job I want. Change again. Now what do? Go back to the drawing board. But again, that mindset kicked in. Okay, well, that didn't work out. I learned from that. You know, what else is out there? And then I thought, well, I'll take a bit of time off over the summer. I spent it with the kids and family. I got bored after a couple of days and thought, right, I love leadership. And I hope Heather's not listening to this. I love leadership, and I'm very fortunate the book was going to paperback. I thought, what a great time to sort of leverage that, and hence I set up the business. And very early days, but meeting some great people and having some really interesting conversations, and I'm really excited about what may come around the corner.
Yeah, and you've highlighted throughout this conversation actually the power of conversation. Yeah. And I guess that's what's really exciting about moving forward. You don't know what's going to come out of any conversation and what's next. And because leadership runs through your DNA, I'm sure it's going to be really powerful and impactful for everyone that it touches, and that ripple effect. So sorry, you were going to say something there, I can see.
Yeah, I was, because I often think about this. When you listen to a lot of people out there saying you've got to have a plan, you've got to have a long-term strategy, what's your passion, what's your purpose, what drives you in life? And there are some people, and all credit to them, that have got that. They know exactly where they're heading, and they would devote their whole life to that one aim. I've never had that. And hence my story of joining the army. I never really knew that I wanted to join. The kind of fell into it, loved it. I didn't know I was going to do 5 years and then get out and do something else. Even 20 years later, I left the army. Don't really know what I'm going to do, but there's lots out there. Let's go for it. I don't think actually there's anything wrong with not having a clear plan and clear purpose. And I think the ability to be flexible, and so long as you keep that positive mindset, so long as you keep things in perspective, and you always pursue something you enjoy. And I think I've been fortunate enough to have had the career that I've had, because I've broadly only looked one job, maybe 2 jobs ahead, and I've gone into jobs or put forward for jobs that I knew that I'd love to do, not because they were going to get me to the next promotion or whatever. It was because I knew that I could offer something and I would love the job. And if you love the job, you're going to work hard, you're going to be a good team member, and the rest will take care of itself. Rather than thinking, I want to be the next general, I want to be the next CEO, and therefore I need to do this, and this in order to get there. That does work well for some people, but I think you've got to keep things in perspective. And I don't think there's anything wrong with having drive and determination and positive mindset, but not quite knowing where it needs to go to. You keep following the path you love, and then you can flex and be agile where you need to, where things don't quite work out. And it certainly works okay for me so far. So we'll see where it comes in 6 months' time when I'm out of a job. But
I'm sure. Well, Joe, it's such a great point as well, because that can also be one of the elements that holds people back from making their decision, because they may say, well, actually, I don't have a plan now. I don't know what I'm going to do. And it's about, sometimes it is taking that leap, and I can relate to that. When I left the corporate environment, obviously I had a similar experience when I left the military, and then I ended up in financial services. I certainly wasn't targeting financial services, but it's where my path led me. Then when I left the corporate environment, that I went through a decision-making process. And one of the things that I think is great to share with anybody, and I always say this about any decisions. I was speaking to another parent about a school decision, for example, recently, when they were looking at schools. Very few things are forever. So, what's the worst that can happen? You make a decision, you go into a different school, you go into a new role, and it doesn't work out. There will be another one. You will learn something from it. You will take something from it. And there will be, I think sometimes we can put weight on our decision as though it has to be perfect. It has to be the right decision. I have to have a plan. When actually we know no plan survives contact. And the ability to sometimes just let things be and work your way through it can be really quite powerful. And sometimes not knowing and not planning means you could go down paths you would never have even thought of.
Definitely.
Which is exciting.
I think you can over plan and you can over expect, and when it doesn't happen, you really struggle. I think if you've got the basics, you've got families, friends, you've got a positive mindset, maybe in certain circumstances you might need some financial security to take certain risks, whatever it may be. But I left the army and we didn't know where the kids were going to school. We didn't know where we were going to live, didn't know what job I was going to do. Now, to some people that might be too much to bear. I think we've been quite fortunate with the change that we'd had for over many years. We kind of got used to that. So but I think if you've got the foundation set around you, then take the risk, because you'll only be asking what if, and that's a dangerous place to be.
Exactly. So there's so much that we've covered already, but if you could highlight your greatest achievement, what would that be?
I don't think there's anything that stands out as a single great achievement. I think for me, when I look back at my career and think, why did I stay in that long? What motivated me to get up in the morning and love doing what I do it was the people. And I know it sounds a bit cliche, but working with people from so many different walks of life, achieving great things, being part of so many great teams, great ethos, cultures, etc. And for me, having the opportunity to support other people and to be a small part in the success of other people, and to see other people achieve beyond either their expectations or the others' expectations of them. And it could be just micro growths or micro achievements in people, day-to-day stuff. But when someone turns around and said, oh, thanks for that, I appreciate you backing me on that, or thanks for that, a bit of advice. For me, that the accumulation of all those moments throughout my career and my life, for me, that's what I feel is the greatest achievement. So it's not one single thing; it's an accumulation of being a small part in seeing others succeed. It's it's really satisfying.
Amazing. So, what are you looking forward to most in terms of the next chapter?
The family, of course, and getting balance with the family, that stands to reason. Seeing the kids grow up and happy, but professionally, wherever it goes, it's about, as I say, about having that impact, about adding as much value as I can to others, individuals, teams, organisations, whatever it may be, and seeing where it goes. Really excited.
Yeah, I'm excited to see where it goes too, and we'll have to get you back on at some point, and maybe once we've convinced Heather that she's also a star in her own right and needs to come and share her story. So thanks, Langley. I've really enjoyed that, and I know there are so many different places we could have gone with that conversation, but I'm sure that those listening would have taken so much from your story. And so thanks for sharing, and thanks for coming and joining us.
Thank you, Sam. It's an absolute pleasure, as always.